Hi, I'm Jade. This is my pitch presentation to remake Francis Ford Coppola's 1992 iteration of Bram Stoker's Dracula as a Nuevo Cine Mexicano / New Wave Mexican cinema movement piece. Mexican New Wave cinema started in the early 90s and spanned across until the 2010s. It was considered the rebirth of Mexican cinema with higher quality productions after years of suffering following the golden age of Mexican cinema. After the Golden Age, audiences began to prefer Hollywood productions over their own homegrown works, mainly due to the economic crash of 1994, causing film production quality to decline. This resulted in a rise of Mexican genres such as luchador films, sexy comedias, mexploitation, which all became infamous. The themes within Mexican cinema are often that of identity, religion, tradition, and socio-political conflicts, usually occurring within Mexico. The movement achieved success with works such as Y tu mamá también, Amores Perros, and, of course, El laberinto del fauno, of which was directed by Guillermo Del Toro, who will be my main influence. During the economic crash, a sparse number of 5 films a year were being released, which is also a contributing factor of audiences following Hollywood releases. Mexican filmmakers from the 90s were nicknamed appropriately the 1990s generation. They were tutored by the generation of 1968 filmmakers. The most profound 90s directors from Mexico would be Guillermo del Toro. Del Toro's stylistic, tonal, and fantastical influence will be the overall aesthetic of my remake of Bram Stoker's Dracula, giving the already beautifully dark film a dark fantastical twist. Other than my admiration of Del Toro's work, what drew me to use Del Toro as my influence was his admiration of creatures in the darkness, and the fact that monsters are often humans within his films. To add to this, Del Toro has a long history of using special effects makeup and practical effects to bring his visions to life. I would be using Del Toro's stylistic influence to enhance the already beautifully dark film. Although it will be a horror film portraying the well-known Dracula, it will still be a gothic, dark tragedy that has a beautiful, fantastical twist. My main idea of using Del Toro as a creative influence for the monsters within Dracula, and Dracula himself, is because the monsters he creates are often inspired by Mexican mythology and creatures that exist in folklore, and many of the creatures in Dracula are often inspired by other mythologies from elsewhere, such as the mention of a strigoi within the film, which is of Polish descent, and of course the appearances of the man-bear and the werewolf. For example, I had an idea that even when Dracula is in his human and younger form, after moving to London, you could still see bits of unhuman-like characteristics, like his ears are slightly pointy or his skin is very pale, which he is anyway, but sort of like the aesthetic of how Prince Nawada looks in Hellboy, putting a very dark, fantastical twist on the story of Dracula. Besides my adoration for the special effects makeup and design of the film, I also love the costume design from Japanese art director Eiko Ishioka. In an ideal world, I would love to have that same costume design with Del Toro's aesthetic, because that would be absolutely beautiful and my vision would be perfect. However, Eiko sadly passed away in 2012. Although Ishioka was mainly a Japanese art director, she was also a costume designer, graphic designer, and known for her work in stage, screen, advertising, and print media. What I love most about her work, also being of Asian descent, you can always see peaks of her cultural influence in her work. Here are some examples of Ishioka's work. As you can see, in Dracula's costume there is often rich, bold reds that will represent bloodlust, his vampirism, etc., danger, and often for daytime wear, people will be wearing muted colours, including the Count himself when he's walking among other people. And Mina is often seen wearing a pale jade green colour, and from these images you can probably see clearer the cultural influences that Ishioka uses within her work. For example, the Count's armor, his helmet looks like a Japanese kabuto, which is a Japanese helmet traditionally for samurai. He's often seen wearing kimonos, and these kimonos often have dragon embroidery, which resembles the Order of the Dracula, but also it has the Oriental influence from Ishioka. As you can see, her work is very beautiful, and rightly so, the film won many awards for the costume design. Now I'll be moving on as to why I want to remake this Dracula. What makes the original a strong story? Dracula is a familiar Gothic tragedy romance that is a classic within English literature and with numerous on-screen iterations. The original film is iconic due to many aspects, such as Roman Coppola, Francis Ford Coppola's son, running the practical effects team. Composer Wojciech Kilar created the iconic Dracula sound, which has been reused many times and seen in TV shows such as American Horror Story. The organic, old-fashioned feel of the film is very natural to the aesthetic. That is very mainly due to Roman Coppola's work on the effects team, alongside aspects such as Dracula having his own shadow actor. There's use of shadow puppetry to portray battles, such as in the beginning you see Dracula versus the Muslim Turks, and you see this later on when Dracula goes to the cinematograph with Mina. This recounting of Dracula is very faithful to the original story of Dracula, whereas iterations such as Nosferatu change the original source material to fit into a film. It's very fresh and new and unique in comparison to other adaptations of Dracula there has been. And to say the least, the cast is very, very recognisable, and they were all on the brink of stardom. It's safe to say that this iteration single-handedly changed Dracula from just a monster horror to a tragic story of a forbidden romance. Yes, there were aspects of romance in the other Draculas, however, this shifted the narrative to a story that was so solely run and pushed forward by romance. Coppola used what he liked to call naive techniques. This film was made in 1992, and at this time Hollywood was thriving off the new computer-generated effects that were going around. However, Coppola used these naive techniques to give the film an organic, natural, old feel. Techniques such as forced perspective, matte paintings, slanted sets, front projection, reverse motion, mini-models, antiquated cameras, rear projection, multiple exposure, and these were all what he liked to call a trick of the eye. This brings me on to my next question: why would a contemporary audience be interested? From recent releases, there is still interest being shown in literary/gothic-esque stories, which is seen from recent successes like The Haunting of Hill House and Bly Manor, American Horror Story, Sweeney Todd, The Vampire Diaries, The Adventures of Sabrina, etc. Although this remake could hit those marks, it would still be something new and fresh that this generation is not used to. Themes such as forbidden love and eternal love, tragedy, sensuality, and aspects of gore and eroticism could appeal to a modern audience in relation to the culture of more openness in a modern society. The characters would be appealing as they were written so uniquely in Coppola's iteration, perhaps seeing such well-known characters in a way they have never seen before. Some historical context of the original's performance. The USA box office grossing was $82 million, becoming the 15th highest grossing film of the year. In the UK's opening weekend, it set a new record of $4 million, beating the record set by Batman Returns. Combined with international grossing, it became the 9th highest film of the year worldwide. The adaptation won 3 Academy Awards for Best Costume Design, Best Sound Effects, Editing, and Best Makeup. The film also won 5 Saturn Awards for Best Horror Film, Director, Actor, Writing, Costume, and Actress. Some interesting and notable facts. The film was a turning point for Coppola, with a screenplay being delivered to him by Winona Ryder herself, having to suddenly drop out of Godfather Part 3 for health reasons. The screenplay was essentially Ryder's apology for dropping out of Godfather 3 so suddenly. The screenplay, written by James B. Hart, who was essentially unknown at the time, but mainly had credits due to his work on Hook, starring Robin Williams and Dustin Hoffman, directed by Steven Spielberg. Coppola took interest in the screenplay due to its faithfulness to the source material, with Coppola and Ryder agreeing there is an untold perspective to Dracula. The film was produced through Coppola's own company, American Zoetrope, which at the time was on the verge of bankruptcy. This big-budget monster horror was risky, but essentially saved the company as well as Coppola's career. In Pan's Labyrinth, Guillermo Del Toro breaks the boundaries of what a fairy tale should be, a disobedient fairy tale, if you will. This is immediately shown to the audience when the film opens with the ending sequence of a dead heroine, more specifically a dead young girl. The story plays out in the Spanish Civil War, with Ophelia being the daughter of the captain's new wife. The film follows two parallel narratives: Ophelia's fairy tale quest provided by the faun, and the political conflict occurring within Spain. Identity, tradition, and political conflicts are very big themes within this film. The use of multiplicity in this film is an aspect I will be using in my remake as a storytelling technique. Multiplicity is a meaning that is a matter of choice. An example would be the murals in the Pale Man sequence, and how it mirrors the captain's banquet scene. It's never meaning that is told, it is always meaning that is inferred by the audience. Guillermo del Toro often does this recurring theme where the humans are the real monsters. We're using dual narratives within Dracula, paying homage to Guillermo del Toro himself. This means a character is never confined to one storyline. So here is my proposal. The Carpathian Count purchases land in London for an unknown reason, becoming enamoured with the deed seller's soon-to-be wife. What ensues is a story of tragedy and forbidden romance. Alucard, a once proud and loyal servant of God, has been alone in his castle too long. To satiate his bloodlust, he purchases land in London to gain access to a fresh audience of prey, until he stumbles upon Mina, a soon-to-be married woman resembling his late love Elisabetta. Here are some mock-up posters. Here we see Tom Hiddleston featuring as the role of Thomas Sharp in Del Toro's Crimson Peak, reimagined as Count Dracula. We also see Ana de Armas as his love interest Mina. Another concept piece features Mads Mikkelsen as Abraham Van Helsing. Henry Cavill will be playing as Jonathan Harker, and Mia Wasikowska as Lucy. In my remake, the vast majority of it will be filmed in England, perhaps using old English buildings for scenes such as Lucy's home, and still using miniatures to portray Dracula's castle. Here are a few locations that resemble the grandeur of Lucy's expensive homes. These locations, combined with lighting, camera techniques, and post-production editing, will hopefully achieve a dark yet beautiful looking set, typical of a Del Toro creation that is also perfect for Dracula. Del Toro uses what he calls colour language as a storytelling technique to show contrast, an example being in Crimson Peak. Our main protagonist, Edith, she's often shown in golden and warm colours, and her hometown Buffalo in America is often seen as warm and golden, whereas in contrast, England and the shark are shown in grey, dull, blue colours. So when putting these characters in their opposing scenery, Edith's warmth often sticks out in contrast to the blue, dull setting of Allerdale Hall in England, and the sharps are often described as shadows by Del Toro when they are shown in Buffalo. So Del Toro likes to use colour to show semiotics, exposition, contrast and connotation. I would use the same idea for Dracula, where he is often wearing red in contrast to the other characters who might be in muted colours or colours that are opposing to his outfit. Some narrative changes. I would exaggerate Mina's conflict on her love interests, her socially acceptable suitor versus her forbidden love, an elusive, charming prince. I would reiterate the idea of Mina desiring to be desired, almost her forcing herself upon Jonathan, but he declines her until marriage. This would replace the peacock/garden scene. I would also change the final sequence of the film, as in the book the hunt for Dracula is very much on a larger scale. Dracula is known for being stronger than more than 20 men, so there would be a sizable force of people on the hunt and pursuit for Dracula. Like at the beginning of the original film, where we see swordplay, we would see it again at the end to mirror the beginning, this time it being more impactful because it's been so long since he's fought. He will still finally be defeated by Mina. However, in true Guillermo del Toro fashion, it will be a bittersweet ending. After beheading Dracula herself, Mina will be physically and emotionally distraught from killing the love of her life. She will be broken, and just like Dracula in the original, she'll be crying tears of blood at her pain of her loss of her love. As Mina cradles the head of her love, we see a greying Jonathan Harker peek through the chapel, staring at Mina, knowing that he will never be able to obtain Mina's heart like the Count did. As we see Mina cradling the dead Dracula, mirroring the beginning shot of Dracula cradling Elisabetta, we will see this transition into an old photograph of Jonathan Harker and Mina, which resembles their dead love, with Mina looking very cold and blank. In conclusion, we'll be using traditional film techniques, Aika Ishioka reminiscent costumes, dark fantasy style makeup, and iterations of Dracula's forms, colour language, detailed sets, Tom Hiddleston as Dracula, Henry Cavill as John Harker, Anna de Armas as Mina, Mia Wasikowska as Lucy. There will be more exploration of Mina's conflict of love, an unhappy, bitter ending, each scene to evoke that feeling of a Grimm's fairy tale. There will be blood, gore, eroticism, and tragedy. Thank you for listening.